Someone would say, why does everybody come in at that exact time? And I would just say, that's how we always do it. That line right there was a trigger for me to think, wait, maybe there's a better way. That's proof alone that genetics are not your destiny. But this is the most important equation that every single person involved in high performance sports, high performance activities should understand. Welcome back to House of Genes, another episode where we're going to talk about building out an athlete profile before they take the first step on the field. My name is Daniel Guzman. I'm the head of performance for 3x4 Genetics. This is the House of Genes. So in previous episodes, we've talked about what a genes first approach is. We recently just built out an athlete's recovery strategy in 20 minutes or less. And now we're going to talk about this idea of profiling. Now, profiling is really important because when an athlete comes in to play for a pro team, typically there's some tests or assessments they have to do upon returning from an off season or if they're coming in from a new team, and they have to perform these tests before they take one step on the field to say that they are healthy, eligible to play, that the team knows what they're getting into. And so we're going to talk about what that looks like, but from a genes first perspective. Now, when I worked with the LA Galaxy, we were getting new players every few years. It was awesome. I was able to create a good relationship with Steven Gerrard. He came through. He went through our battery of tests. I can remember it like it was yesterday, starting out with a functional movement screen in FMS and ending with a specific type of conditioning run up on the field. We did this with Nigel de Jong, Ashley Cole, Jelle Van Dam, shout out my boy there. And all the way through every team I've been at, U.S. men's national team, LAFC, we do these performance and medical intakes so we understand what are we starting with and how can we develop a program that keeps us athletes on the field, not injured, recovered the right way, that we are creating this personalized program. Or little did I think I was. Come to find out, after all the work we've done with 3x4 now, that the genes first approach, we were missing one of the most important pieces. We were not doing true personalization at that point. But with genetic testing involved, we have an idea of who the athlete is, and we are able to test, not guess, to get the results that we want. So we're going to start this thing off with a genes first profile. And what's going to be really cool is you're going to be able to see what this profile looks like over here once we build it in. Okay, so before we put that up there, we're going to talk about what this genes first profile is. Okay, these are the 4 things that an athlete must do before I recommend any type of training. I want to get a full idea from the different departments involved to understand what we're working with here. So the first thing we do is we do a genetic test. Okay, we want to understand their starting point. We want to do root cause performance. We want to do root cause medicine. We're trying to build out the best health and performance plan that we can. So we start with a genes first approach. Once we do the genetic test, we can see where their quote-unquote hotspots are, their high responses are, their low responses. At 3x4 Genetics, we call this follow the purple. So we look for the purple to see where they're the most highest impact across all the different pathways that we look at. Now, again, as another reminder, as this podcast is new, we're going to always talk about this pathway approach. And it's really key to differentiate why 3x4 Genetics is different than any other genetic testing company out there. All the other genetic testing companies, they'll typically look at individual SNPs, okay, single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNP SNPs. So they look at these single genes and then they make decisions off that. And while they are looking at genetics, it is not the most robust amount of information to give the best healthcare plan possible. So we look at groups of genes that speak to inflammation, or groups of genes that speak to power, or groups of genes that speak to how we metabolize caffeine, or we look at these different ergogenic aids. And that gives us the best possible outcomes because we have a more robust amount of data to make decisions off of. I hope that makes sense. So we start with the genetic test, we do our pathway analysis, and we follow the purple. All right. Now, when we do our gene fit assessments, there's a bunch of different genes we might be looking at. Now, these individual genes will highlight some of the important factors that they play into an athlete's performance program. So you might see some single genes here. We've got COMT, COMT, and we're talking about the different stress hormones that that gene may look at. Other genes that we'll put up that look at injury profiling or the response to power or endurance. If we're talking about the ACE gene or actin-3, or we're looking at tendons, COL12A1, whatever those might be, we're going to look at those. So right here, you're going to see this image of a footballer with all the genes around them. And that's just to show that there's some really powerful genes we look at, but always remember that's in the context of a pathway. Okay. So we start with that. Once we go through our genetic test, okay, we're going to look at these categories. We're going to look at the training category. I want to understand how they respond to power type exercises, power type stimulus, how they respond to endurance, what their VO2 max potential is. All that stuff is going to give me a starting point for when I make decisions in the gym or on the field. After that, we're going to look at recovery. Okay, within recovery, we talked about this in the last session. We're talking about post-training inflammation, post-training oxidative stress, post-training muscle damage. And if we can get a really good understanding of what is going to keep them from getting back to their ready state, what's going to keep them from recovering in the most optimal way, then we're going to be able to have more specific, more accurate recovery programming. Okay, from there, we're going to talk about their injury profiles. Okay, now this can be a touchy one. If we see that someone has a high response for a connective tissue injury, ACL tear, Achilles tendon tear, it does not mean they are destined to get that injury. It does mean that based off the way that their collagen formation is and that connective tissue formation is, that they may be at slightly higher risk than someone that would be a low responder to that or lower impact when we look at that pathway. Now that's important. If I know that and I believe that your genes are not your destiny, they're your starting point, as a coach, that gives me confidence to tell the athlete, now I know where we need to spend more time. Do we need to spend more time on isometrics in the gym? Do we got to spend more time on specific plyometrics? This might help me to drive home the reason why strength training is really important for this individual, and specifically strength training at specific joint ranges of motion, right? That's going to help drive that program home. So when I'm meeting with an athlete, they're saying, well, why am I doing split squats? Why am I doing step-ups? Why am I doing trap bar deadlifts? Or why am I doing drop jumps? Whatever it might be, we're not just saying we have this idea of why you should do it and because soccer needs these different capacities, which could all be true. We can say, hey, Jeremiah, based off of how you respond, how your body was created, we can make these specific programming decisions in the gym, on the field, in the recovery room, with your nutrition to make sure that we keep you as robust as possible to reduce that likelihood of injury. So we go through there. Okay. So we talked about the training category. We talked about recovery. We're talking about injury risk. There might be other things that are really important to the dietetic staff or the sports nutrition staff. Okay. Now, caffeine is a really fun one to look at. Most athletes that I work with use caffeine as an ergogenic aid for their sport. That's great. Caffeine can be super powerful. I remember at the LA Galaxy and LAFC specifically, the guys would come in on a game day. They'd be getting ready for their prep, which could be on the table. The athletic trainers could be in the gym. But about 30 minutes before the game or 30 minutes before the warm-up, every single guy would come through the espresso machine and they would come make their espresso. It was almost just like a ritual where at that time they were all coming through no matter what they were doing. They'd come get their espresso, the ones who use caffeine, and they would make sure they drink it 30 minutes before. Okay, I just thought that's the way of doing things. When I was at LAFC and that would happen, someone would say, why does everybody come in at that exact time? And I would just say, that's how we always do it. That line right there was a trigger for me to think, wait, maybe there's a better way. Anytime anyone ever says that, hey, mom, why do we always cut cookies that way? Well, come to find out that grandma didn't have a certain cookie cutter, so we cut it the way that we had available to us. It's not because it's the best way. It's because that's how someone did it a long time ago. Now, caffeine's really cool because when we look at caffeine and we look at the genes there, I believe the gene is cytochrome P1A2. We'll have to check me on that. Again, for everyone out there, I am a high-performance coach that has fallen in love with genetics. We have genetic scientists way smarter than I am. Our clinical team is so brilliant that I learn from them. So they always got my back if I get something wrong. But I am an enthusiast who is really passionate about genetics, and I love finding ways to do applied sports genetics. But we look at that gene, CYP1A2, and that gene can tell us how caffeine metabolizes in the liver. But specifically, what is the timing that an athlete may need to take caffeine if they want to use it for the aid that they think they're getting from it? Okay. Now, some athletes need to take it 30 to 45 minutes before their event, whatever that might be. But other athletes who might be lower responders, low impact, might need to take it up to 90 minutes before. So think about we've got all these athletes. Again, they are guessing when to take their caffeine. And if they take it 30 minutes before kickoff, if they're one of the ones that are slow responders, and it's not going to kick in for them from a genetic standpoint, from a genes first perspective, if it's not going to kick in for 90 minutes, well, guess what? We've got 30 minutes before right here. Okay. The match starts here. By the time halftime hits at 45 minutes, they took it over here at the 30-minute mark. Okay. They're at 75 minutes. We can do math here. That's great. Okay. According to their genes, the caffeine still has not kicked in yet. So they missed an entire half of the match without that caffeine benefit. Okay, they come back after 15 minutes. Now they're 90 minutes. It's kicking in. And so for the second half, they're going to get that benefit from caffeine. But it was a total inaccurate intake of that caffeine. We wanted them to take it much earlier so they can get it in the first half, and if they need more, potentially in the second half. Okay. Now think about the ones that do respond quickly. They take it 30 minutes before, it hits them right there. They might metabolize that so fast that they have to take another hit 45 minutes in. All right. But again, without a genes first approach, you're just guessing, you're putting in caffeine into your body and calling upon your nervous system to make these responsive changes in a very inaccurate way. It just drives me nuts now that I can see it so clearly. So we look at that. We can also look at who's a high responder for nitrate. And although these things might be great for everyone, we want to make sure that we are taking that genes first, high precision, high accuracy approach. Okay. So we look at all this kind of stuff, which is why we start with that genes first approach there. Then when we get to the biomarkers, okay, step 2, when we want to do blood labs, we want to do different types of assessments, functional tests that might be important based on what's going on with that athlete. We've got athletes that got gut issues, they've got detox issues, and so we might use a different functional test to give us an answer of what we're looking at. Now we have a better framework of what test they should be doing. Instead of telling every athlete, oh, you're all going to do the same panels, and we're just going to see what we find. Some athletes might need a specific inflammation panel, okay? Some might need a specific cholesterol panel. The list can go on and on. And how great would it be for athletes that do not like needles, who don't like giving blood, who don't like doing those assessments, if we said, hey, we know that this is a really tough time for you. We know you don't like doing this. Here's why we're doing these tests. I'm telling you, now that I do a genes first approach with all these athletes, it means so much more to them. Where they're like, yeah, I don't like doing that, but it's giving me information that's going to help keep me healthy, right? And even in some instances, we don't have to do blood. We could do a hair sample, a urine sample. So there might be alternatives based off the genes they have to get the right functional tests that are the most appropriate for them. How cool is that? Okay, after that, we still want to do a movement eval. Movement eval is really important too. Okay, this is when I think about they're going to the athletic trainers, the physical therapist, anyone who's a movement specialist, and they might be taking an initial assessment early in the season to see, is there any sort of impingements, asymmetries, things that we got to be aware of, so that if something picks up later in the season, we've got a baseline to look at. Okay? Maybe they come in with some sort of impingement in the hip already. Right now, they're going to create a program for that. All right? This is also probably the time where they're doing their injury intake to understand, did you get injured during the offseason? What were your injuries the past 12 months if they're a new player? Again, it's building information to get personalized and accurate information about who the athlete is. Okay? What's funny is before the genetic test, we were doing these things and we were saying the whole reason is to get insight in who the athlete is. We want to understand their initial starting profile. Somehow we were all missing the most important piece, but no longer. Every athlete, coach, GM, president, owner in the world is going to know why this is so valuable. That is the reason why we do this. Okay, after the movement evals, we go to the performance test. This could be your strength conditioning staff, sports nutrition. This could be your sports scientist, biomechanist, whatever it is. Now we're doing these tests that we're talking about. Maybe it's a VO2. Maybe it's a specific conditioning test in the field, or it's a sprinting assessment, although we typically wouldn't do that the first day back. It could be force plate jumps. It could be a velocity measure in the gym. There's a bunch of things that teams may want to collect that gives them information about what? Programming. Why do they choose certain exercises? Because they want a specific outcome. If they want a specific outcome, they want to be as precise and accurate as possible, which is why we go back to this genetic test. Now, imagine we're not doing the genetic test at all. This is the formula that everybody uses. Remember, T is for training, and they try and manipulate all these different variables of nutrition, strength, field work. When they're doing conditioning on the field, when they're doing recovery, they're trying to move all these pieces around so they can get an optimal performance on match day. But what they're missing is the actual formula that drives the best results. Okay? Genetics plus training equals performance. All right, we'll have to share this in the show notes after. But genetics accounts for 66% of athletic performance. That's things like power, endurance, VO2 max potential. And we're looking at injury profiling. All these things make up 66%. It's your starting point, right? And the rest of this part of the equation, we can actually do something about it. That's the great thing. You're not just destined to get an ACL tear. You're not just destined to not be able to play 90 minutes because you're low impact in endurance. These powerful starting places of having a genes first approach should give you more confidence, more hope that you can achieve a high level of performance regardless of what your starting point is. Okay, there's athletes we've looked at that have low response to endurance and they run ultra marathons. Okay, that's proof alone that genetics are not your destiny. And the same goes for a bunch of different examples we could look at. But this is the most important equation that every single person involved in high performance sports, high performance activities should understand. Genetics plus training equals performance. We're going to stop there for this episode. This is the House of Genes. I'm your host, Daniel Guzman, head of performance for 3x4 Genetics. Thanks for checking in. Thanks for growing. See you next week.